Good afternoon. My name is David Smith, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners. With me today are Captain Arudi, who's Nevada's Interstate Compact Commissioner and an employee of the Nevada Division of Parole and Probation, and Warden Baca from the Northern Nevada Correctional Center. Captain Arudi and Warden Baca are available to answer questions relative to their operational jurisdiction. Before I read my statement and answer questions, I'd like to take the time to thank Chief Tushman of the Nevada Capitol Police, Sheriff Kenny Furlong, and Assistant Sheriff Ken Sandage of the Carson City Sheriff's Office for their help with security and crowd control today. I'd also like to take the time to thank the Nevada System of Higher Education and the IT staff of the Nevada Department of Corrections for their network and video conference support for this hearing. Lastly, I want to thank and recognize the administrative staff of the Nevada Parole Board, who for the past 3 months have done a tremendous job working together to facilitate our activities related to the public and media interest in this case. At 11:55 a.m. this morning, the Nevada Board of Parole Commissioners voted to grant parole to Mr. Orenthal Simpson, effective when eligible. Mr. Simpson's eligibility date is October 1st, 2017, and he may be released from prison on or after that date, once any proposed release plans have been approved. The board stated the reasons for granting parole included: Mr. Simpson had no prior or minimal criminal conviction history, he had a positive institutional record, he had participated in programs specific to addressing behavior that led to his incarceration, he has stable release plans and community and family support, and the victim in the case testified in support of Mr. Simpson's release. This case will now be turned over to the Division of Parole and Probation to gather and investigate Mr. Simpson's proposed release plans. Captain Arudi and Warden Baca indicated they don't have specific statements to make, so at this time I can open it up to questions.
Interestingly, that you've already provided us the contact information for Florida. So you were talking about earlier, Captain, about the process in Florida. So have you already talked and discussed all of this with him in anticipation of this, since he had already made his desire to move to Florida clear? I mean, did you already know about this, and are they aware and ready for this?
So to answer your question, we did not know what the parole board's plans were, if they were going to approve it or not, because they make that determination at the hearing. What we did do is advanced planning in anticipation that if he were to be granted parole, that part of his plan that we were aware of was that he'd had family in Florida that would serve as that support system for him, and with the understanding that he may be interested in doing an interstate compact. I have reached out to my counterparts in Florida. They are aware, and they're waiting for, they'll be waiting for our packet for their investigation to make the determination on whether or not they're willing to accept his case for supervision.
And they're also in a position to deny his request to go to Florida.
That's correct. So with the interstate compact, first of all, there's a handout that I provide to everybody that breaks down what the interstate compact process is. And that's a handout that's provided by the Interstate Commission for Adult Offender Supervision. Their website is on there, and it's a public access website. Anybody can go on there, and it's got everything you could ever possibly want to know about the interstate compact. So you're welcome to go on to there. But with that being said, they do have, when we put the packet together with the plan and list what his support system is, what his plan for parole is, we submit that to Florida. They have up to 45 days to do that investigation, and they provide a response. Interstate compact is not a guaranteed thing. Interstate compact is a privilege, but it's a privilege based on meeting certain criteria. And Florida, when they do their investigation, they'll make the determination of whether or not they're going to be willing to accept his case.
Captain, in your experience, how often does the receiving state say no thank you?
Depending on what the support system is. In the case of either a returning resident or in the case of resident family, the acceptance rate, as long as there's a valid plan of supervision, is high. In the case of a discretionary case where a person doesn't have that support system, but they have other opportunities they're looking to pursue, or they're looking for a change of scenery, in those discretionary cases, the rate of acceptance is lower.
With 2.5 months between now and the eligibility date, what would be the hitch that he would not get out on October 1st?
So the one thing that Nevada doesn't control, under the Interstate Compact, the receiving state, which in this case, if the plan is for him to go to Florida, the receiving state would have up to 45 days. If they were to exceed that 45 days, that could postpone. If there was a problem with their investigation that they couldn't complete it in that 45 days, that could postpone the release. But with the amount of lead time, we don't anticipate that there would be a problem with
You
that.
would not have to spend any time in Nevada at all.
That's correct.
What if Florida said no?
If Florida said no, then the next step this is where I would have to be aware of what the conditions of his release were. Our pre-release unit would look to find him a suitable plan or work with him to develop a suitable plan for here in Nevada.
Will the date and location of his his release be given to the public and the media, or can he just be let go without any of us knowing?
That would be a conversation for Warden Baca. Parole and Probation works with the caseworkers at NDOC to develop a release plan in the release state, but the actual physical release is part of NDOC.
And how are they typically extradited back to that state or to that state?
Well, it's not that he wouldn't be extradited to that state. So if he were accepted for supervision in another state, then either family members would assist with those plans, but generally speaking, most of them either go by bus or plane. The travel arrangements are made upon in anticipation of their release.
So the calls you made to Florida previous to this, would you typically do that for another inmate knowing, hey, I want to spend the rest of my time in Indiana, or is this because we fast-tracked everything with Mr. Simpson?
It's not that it's fast-tracked, but because we know that it's such a high-profile case with a lot of interest in the interest of the other state and preparing them for the phone calls and the emails that they may receive, it was a courtesy to let them know that.
Captain, in the event that the Florida thing doesn't happen, is he allowed to pick another state? I know he has a daughter in California, so is he allowed to pick a different place to go?
Sure. As long as there's a valid plan of supervision and he has a support system, there's no he wouldn't be restricted to just one state.
What is his family support system in Florida? What do you know about that?
I'm not familiar with what his support system is, other than I know that he had family members testify today.
But when he is released, say that Florida accepts him and they do it in time for him to be released on the earliest possible release date, which is October 1st. Right. So he would then just walk out. Is there a possibility he may go to another institution, like some kind of step-down facility or halfway out, sometime between now and the time he's let out of incarceration?
So if the plan of transfer is to go to Florida, there wouldn't be a release to the street to go to Florida in that way that you're talking about, like a transitional living or a halfway house. But again, as far as the release process, I'll turn that over to Warden Baca to talk with you about. On my handout, I do have my contact information. You're welcome to give me a call. Additionally, I also have my email address. You're welcome to email me. We will update our website at Parole and Probation to include the same information that you have. Typically, the division does not speak specifically to one particular offender over another. What we will do is I'm more than willing to discuss with you what the general process is for the Interstate Compact or pre-release.
Well, let me put one final one on the transfer to Florida then. Based on your experience, Captain, and the matrix you provided to us, does it appear that Simpson will go to Florida?
As long as he has a valid plan of supervision along with the support system, there would be a good opportunity for him to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what happens now? What's he, for the next couple of months, what's he?
Now he will stay at Lovelock, and they'll develop the release plan for him for his release parole plan, and then we would go from there as far as for his release, prepare for his release.
Why, is there any say he stays in Nevada, is there any halfway house situation or anything for somebody that committed a crime as he did, or?
Well, right now his with his classification and all that, he'd probably stay in Lovelock, and then release prior to his release, he would move to one of the other institutions that does releases, If he's going to release in the north, that'd be Northern Nevada Correctional Center. If it's in the south, more than likely High Desert State Prison.
So
And
we spend, what, 1 or 2 weeks there, a month?
right, it would be a short period of time. And then he would transport out. It's just easier to transport from those areas than it is from Lovelock.
So this would be another prison that prepares, that does releases, you mean, that's a specialty of theirs or something like that?
No, all the release planning and all that would be done at Lovelock, and then it would just be the matter of moving them basically closer to a place that's easier to transport from, closer to an airport or such like that.
Oh, okay. And one other question, I'm sorry, if I might, one of the things that Florida will be considering is whether they want to provide the same types of support and supervision that normally he would have otherwise received from Nevada's probation commission, right? So if Florida does accept him, that means it's off your hands. Nevada doesn't have any role. Then once you move to Florida, they have Nevada probation and part doesn't have any role in supervising his release after that.
So under the Interstate Compact, when a state accepts a person for supervision, the state the sending state, which in this case would be Nevada, he is still the responsibility of Nevada, and he will be the responsibility of Nevada until he discharges from his parole. What Florida is able to do is Florida is able to add terms and conditions to him to supervise him in a similar manner to how they would supervise their own in like circumstances. So in this case, Florida, if that's where he winds up doing his Interstate Compact to, Florida would provide him with terms and conditions, and Florida provides courtesy supervision for Nevada. But the ultimate authority for that case is still Nevada.
If I missed this, how long is this parole for? How many years?
It's for whatever his discharge date would be.
Okay.
Warden Buckland, will the location and date of his release be released out to the public?
He would be made aware of when his release date just prior and all that. We have what we call like a lock-in date of when we know for sure that that's the date that he's going to be going to. But as far as making any kind of announcement, that's not something we normally do for any of the other inmates. So I don't believe we would be doing that.
Warden, you mentioned that at some point he may be transferred prior to his release, but until then, for the near future, does anything change in the terms of his confinement privileges, the day-to-day at Lovelock?
No, none of that should change. This should just be really the only thing that he's going to be working on right now is preparing his plan, his parole plan, and making sure that gets in and all that, and just pretty much continuing with what he's been doing.
Is there a deadline for getting in that plan? To be able to make October 1st?
Well, he wants to get that information in as soon as possible so that people can start working on it.
So he doesn't submit that plan to you prior to today? You guys don't, you know he has people, I want to go to Florida, these are my support, but an actual plan, you don't have that yet?
Well, what we have is, what happens prior is that there's a parole report that is done, and then his intentions of what he wants to do, should he make parole, is part of that parole report.
To the extent that he has to check in or with a parole or probation supervisor from time to time after his release, would he be doing that in Florida, or would he have to come back to Nevada for that? That's kind of what the...
So when he's under supervision by Florida as a courtesy supervision
Can you
for
go to the
Nevada.
mic? Can you go
Oh,
to the
sure.
please?
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yes, so when Florida is providing the courtesy supervision of Mr. Simpson's case, he would report to a Florida probation officer or parole officer in this case.
So if anything went wrong, you know, he did something, did something where that potentially was a violation of probation, ultimately he would end up answering for that back in Nevada.
Correct. So if his actions were to lead to a violation and Florida would submit that violation to us, ultimately, if he were to be returned for revocation, he would be coming back to Nevada to answer for that revocation before the parole board.
I know he's gone 9 years, no disciplinary action in prison, but in the next 2 months, is there anything that could happen at Lovelock or another facility that could jeopardize his parole being granted now?
Well, any inmate that's granted parole has to continue to follow all the rules and all that they need to, and you know, any inmate that has such a serious rule violation, there is the possibility of parole being revoked.
Well, is there a situation though, Warden, where can he ask for special protection or special, circumstances because he doesn't want to be sort of, I guess, put himself in harm's way or put himself in a situation where others might want to wish him harm or get him in trouble. So can he request any kind of special treatment or protection?
He could make that request. However, he would need to provide some sort of basically some sort of evidence to base that request off of.
You know what I'm saying here. I mean, it's possible that, you know, and he talked about it in his hearing, that prisoners have a tendency to do things for stupid reasons.
Right.
So if someone kind of had it out for him and wanted to jeopardize his parole.
They've had 9 years to do that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You know, as warden, do you have any reservations about letting him walk out of there on October 1st?
You know, that the parole board makes that decision, and our job is to keep him until they tell us to let him go. So that's where ours.
And you weren't in the deliberations, were you, David?
Thank you. I came in and out when they were deliberating just to make sure everything was okay. I needed to do the timeliness, but I did not participate in their deliberations.
Were there any sticking points, any points that came up that they were disagreeing on?
By law in Nevada, deliberations for parole hearings are confidential, and so we would not
You
release.
can tell us, we won't tell
We wouldn't release any of that information.
Is there any paperwork that would be released after this date, the score, the ranking of why they let him go?
We just distributed
Did I see it? I didn't see it.
a copy of the order, the conditions of parole, as well as the risk instrument and aggravating and mitigating factors that they mentioned in the hearing.
Was there anything unusual about the amount of time that they spent deliberating?
No, I would, for this type of a hearing, generally deliberations with smaller panels are shorter because you have fewer people. For commissioners, that was not, it wouldn't be uncommon for those.
What about the time of the hearing, how long it took to get to deliberation?
This hearing was a little bit longer because of the amount of conversation that took place. There were 4 commissioners, so we knew it would last longer. We also expected that we would have a little bit more leeway. We would allow a little bit more leeway to allow information to get on the record. And they did want to take time to actually talk about how things are done because of the interest in this case.
Can you describe Mr. Simpson as a prisoner? What was he really like? His daily routine? Was he a model prisoner? I will say that he was a model prisoner, but what does that mean? Was he?
I'm sorry, ma'am. He was never at NNCC, and I had very little dealings, if at all, with him when he first came in at High Desert. So that would have been my only involvement with him.
Do you know?
No.
All right.
One thing, the parole board will not be doing any interviews, so this is your one shot to ask any question
Would you
of
do
the
an
board.
interview?
Sorry, no.
Will somebody at some point, David, at Lovelock be available to sort of characterize Simpson's incarceration?
Do you mean as far as like a PIO or something?
Yeah. Will
Brooke
someone-
Keast is the PIO for the Department of Corrections, and she should be able to answer any questions related to that.
This is a little bit off topic, but during, and I forget when this happened exactly, sometime during the course of Mr. Simpson's incarceration, there were reports that he got into a fight and something like that. I don't know if that was ever addressed then, or if you could address that now, whether he had any kind of, were there any kind of conflicts that he did have, maybe that were not maybe his fault, but that he was involved in nevertheless?
Well, during the hearing, I noted that I didn't hear of any disciplinary rule infractions he had, so it said he was disciplinary free. So I would say no.
Can you again just reiterate why it is that we were able to get a decision today instead of waiting 10 days, 3 weeks, as we would for Joe Blow?
As you recall, in the 2013 hearing, it was a panel of 1 commissioner and 1 case hearing representative. After that hearing, there wasn't a lot of interest at the time of the hearing. We had several reporters and 1 photographer, I think, and 1 camera. But the minute that hearing took place, we became inundated with requests for information by the media. And so we got that order out as soon as we could. In February, there was there were news articles that started coming out, and we began to get inundated by the press for questions about the parole hearing, when it would be, and we realized if we didn't start then to prepare for a potential huge event like this turned out to be, that we would have a lot of problems. The board does hold hearings with 4 commissioners. It's not often, because we hold about 9,000 hearings a year, so we have to spread the caseload out between commissioners and hearing reps. In this case, because of the media interest, we opted to have a majority present so that we could provide a ruling on the same day and allow you wonderful folks to be able to go home and let us get back to work.
Mr. Smith, in Nevada, is expression of remorse and insight not a required criteria for release on parole?
It is not. Now, the board does note in some of its factors when a mitigating factor of remorse could be noted, but it's generally only applied, for example, if a person committed a crime and they immediately went and confessed or turned themselves in because of their immediate remorse. And that's the only time that factor is. But the board does not require that an inmate state or indicate that they are remorseful
There
to
was
get
some
parole.
talk that he wasn't really remorseful when he was answering some of the questions. What, you have been to other parole hearings. What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
Is it true that he wasn't really that remorseful?
I think that you would have to let the hearing and the questions and the testimony of the hearing stand on its record, because I don't think I can address that here. Yes, sir.
You typically say that it takes days or sometimes weeks or even longer to make it to the board to render a determination.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it usually just days?
Okay, generally what happens in a regular parole hearing, the panel will make a recommendation to the board. And in Nevada, the panel can make a recommendation and the board members can review and vote by file review, and they can review. We record the hearings as well, so they can review the hearing if they had any concerns or questions, and then issue the order once there's a majority. So it doesn't have to be a public meeting to issue that. That can take, because commissioners in Las Vegas are voting on Carson City cases and vice versa, it can take about 2 weeks. And we don't generally release results until we know that the inmate has been notified, and so that adds a little bit more time to it. But in this case, because they had 4 commissioners who voted in a majority, they were able to give that answer today.
Maybe I missed it. Did you answer the question whether you're going to tell us when and where you will be released?
So typically we don't give that give that information ahead of time. The inmate in general will know ahead of time when his release is. Basically we give what's called like a locked-in release date. But as far as announcing when and where he's going to be released, we normally don't do that.
Normally, but this is not a normal case.
Okay. So I would tell you I don't believe we have any plans of doing that.
But he'd be here up until the final 2 weeks or so, or 3 weeks. Would that be safe to say?
That would be safe to say. He would remain in Lovelock until just prior to his release.
Would you make an exception?
Again, I don't believe we have any plans on doing that.
And the facility he would be transferred to would be one that was closer to airports and public transportation?
Yeah.
Or to populated areas? Like,
yes.
Which, like, what would those be?
So we do releases, we primarily do releases out of NNCC for the Northern Nevada Correctional Center, which is located here in Carson City, and then out of, in the south, out of High Desert State Prison.
And how will he get back to Florida if that's where he goes?
Those arrangements will be made with his parole plan.
Yeah, those are. Yeah, so once the release plan is developed, part of the arrangements that pre-release works out with the caseworkers at NDOC is whether it's going to be by air, by train, and usually then they work with the family to make arrangements on the purchase of that ticket.
Thank you all very much for your
Thank you.
cooperation.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys. We realize you're going through
Thank you
a
very
great deal
much.
of trouble you don't normally go
Yeah,
through.
thank you.
Art,
Do you know why?
We came a long way.
Do you know why one of the parole commissioners was wearing a Kansas City Chiefs tie?
I would say probably because he likes the Kansas City Chiefs.
If you had to do all over again, would you do it?
Pardon? Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. This will conclude the press conference, and I hope you have a wonderful trip back to wherever you came from. Thank you.
It's almost going to be a long season for the Chiefs, so.